Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dive straight into a genuinely fascinating mystery, one that kicks off in the world of modern neurology and ends up taking us literally millions of years into our deep past. We are going to examine a very specific physical condition, how it impacts the human body today, and then uncover something truly mind-blowing that the fossil record tells us about our ancient ancestors. Seriously, by the end of this explainer, you might just look at human nature itself in a completely different way.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start by defining what monoplegia actually is. Then we'll compare acquired versus inherited paralysis. After that, we're looking at paralysis in ancient humans, reviewing the actual fossil evidence, and finally unpacking the roots of human compassion. Starting right off with Section 1, what is monoplegia? We'll be looking at the clinical bounds of single limb paralysis. So clinically speaking, monoplegia strictly means paralysis that affects just one single limb. We're talking about either just one arm or just one leg losing function. It is a very specific, localized loss of movement. And, this is completely distinct from something like hemiplegia, which is where paralysis takes out both an arm and a leg on the exact same side of the body. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. Monoplegia is entirely isolated to a single limb. Moving right into Section 2, acquired versus inherited paralysis, focusing on external events versus genetic factors. So how exactly does this kind of isolated paralysis happen to a person? Well, when you break it down, monoplegia is almost exclusively an acquired condition, rather than a genetic one. Basically, it originates from external events or injuries that happen after birth, things that cause immediate, direct damage to the nerves or the central nervous system. Inherited genetic conditions, on the other hand, they really play a very minor, rare role here. Sure, there are some rare genetic variants that might cause something like a fragile nerve syndrome, making someone a bit more susceptible to an injury, but monoplegia itself isn't generally something passed down through your family tree. If it's primarily acquired, what's actually causing it today? Well, physical trauma and accidents that damage the brain or spinal cord are incredibly common culprits. Then you've got things like strokes, the growth of tumors, severe infections that manage to reach the nervous system, or just direct nerve damage. These are sudden, unexpected events that can happen to literally any of us today. A car accident, a sudden stroke, or a bad infection can permanently impact a previously perfectly healthy arm or leg. Which leads us to a pretty pivotal question. We know all about modern car accidents and medical strokes, but what about our distant ancestors? Did ancient humans, living hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago, experience the same debilitating paralysis? That brings us to Section 3, paralysis in ancient humans and the shared vulnerability of the hominin spine. The short answer to that question, a resounding yes. We shared the exact same biological blueprint. When we trace our evolutionary family tree, starting way back with the pre-human ancestor Australopithecus 3.2 million years ago, running through Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, the Neanderthals, all the way up to Stone Age Homo sapiens, we see a compounding case. Because they shared our central nervous system, the same fragile spinal cords and nerves, there was never really a perfectly healthy ancient species. Severe injury and disability were universal human experiences. But obviously the causes back then were tied to a pretty brutal prehistoric environment. There were absolutely no workplace safety rules out there on the savannah. Falling from trees, dodging massive predators, or surviving brutal hunting accidents routinely shattered spines and severed nerves. They were also super vulnerable to infectious diseases like polio, which has actually been plaguing humanity for millennia. And just like today, congenital conditions like cerebral palsy popped up occasionally, leaving kids with localized paralysis. Okay, let's get into the hard proof in Section 4, the fossil evidence. We're tracing disability through deep time. First up, we have Turkana Boy. He was a Homo erectus youth who lived about 1.5 million years ago in what is now Kenya. Detailed scans of his fossilized spine revealed a severe, long-term slipped disc. Now, this juvenile disc herniation would have caused chronic, just crippling back pain and severe sciatica. If you know anyone who's dealt with extreme sciatica, you know it literally pinches the nerves, causing temporary motor weakness, numbness, and a partial inability to move a leg. It's almost identical to monoplegia. So this kid was partially paralyzed and severely hobbled in a world absolutely teeming with predators. We can go even further back to the really harrowing story of an adult female Homo erectus known as KNM-ER1808 from 1.7 million years ago. Her bones are completely covered in this thick layer of diseased bone growth. The cause? An acute overdose of vitamin A, most likely from eating the liver of a predatory animal. This condition is brutal. It causes agonizing pain, your skin sloughs off, and it literally causes the tissues connecting your muscles to your bones to tear apart. She would have been completely incapacitated, just bedridden, unable to move her limbs for weeks, maybe even months, before she finally passed away. Fast forward a bit to 500,000 years ago in Spain. Scientists found the remains of a 10-year-old Homo heidelbergensis child. This child suffered from craniosynostosis, which is a premature fusing of the skull that drastically increases pressure on the brain. This frequently causes cerebral palsy and localized motor paralysis, again, very much like monoplegia. The fact that this child lived to be 10 years old is incredibly moving. It provides some of the most ancient, concrete proof we have of a hunter-gatherer tribe collectively stepping up to provide long-term, intensive social care to a highly dependent, disabled youth. Then there's the amazing story of Shanidar I. He was a Neanderthal, affectionately nicknamed Nandi, living about 45,000 years ago in Iraq. As a young guy, he took a massive blow to the head that caused severe neurological damage. It blinded him in one eye and left him with a completely withered, non-functional right arm. It was either totally paralyzed or eventually amputated. But here's the kicker. Nandi lived well into his 40s. That proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that his community protected him. They kept him by the fire and actively fed him, even though he was completely unable to hunt. And finally, 31,000 years ago in Borneo, we find a Stone Age Homo sapiens who actually survived a deliberate, highly advanced surgical amputation of their lower left leg. The limb was likely useless or paralyzed due to a severe injury beforehand. What is absolutely mind-blowing about this is that the individual survived the ancient surgery and lived for years afterward as an amputee, moving with a nomadic tribe through some incredibly rough jungle terrain. Which brings us to the climax of our explainer, Section 5, The Roots of Compassion, Survival of the Most Empathetic. Think about it. Out in the wild, a lone animal with a paralyzed leg, a broken spine, or a severe illness doesn't last long. They're usually taken out by predators within hours. A disabled individual can't hunt, they can't gather, and they sure can't run away. So, the undeniable fact that these ancient bones show extensive healing, it means survival required intense, dedicated social care. Empathy wasn't just nice to have, it was an evolutionary imperative. Our ancestors actively carried their injured, shared their hard-earned food, and guarded the vulnerable from giant prehistoric threats. This quote really hits the nail on the head and summarizes the science perfectly. Disability didn't make them weak. It forced them to become more cooperative and social, which is exactly what allowed humans to survive. Long before modern Homo sapiens even walked the earth, our early ancestors were already acting as caregivers. Caring for the vulnerable is a trait that's been around for nearly 2 million years. It's woven right into the very fabric of how we managed to conquer the globe. We so often think of medicine and caregiving as these modern, civilized inventions, right? Are traits that are totally exclusive to our specific species. But if compassion is actually older than our species, if empathy is the core trait that truly kept our earliest ancestors alive in the harshest conditions imaginable, how does that change how we view human nature today? I really hope this explainer sparked your curiosity about our surprisingly empathetic evolutionary roots. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.